welcome. I hope you're enjoying some of the sunshine that's gone on outside our windows this morning, or this afternoon, I should say, rather. So welcome to supporting students in special schools and special classes to navigate the social environment post-COVID. And I can't tell you how good it feels to put the words post-COVID in any shape or form into our vocabulary at the moment, and long may it last. Okay, just a little bit of housekeeping, before we get going. The first thing to say is that this is going to be recorded today, but a recording will be made available to everybody that attends. And the other thing I suppose to say is that we will have documents, a resource pack and slides for you to download and take away with you. If you haven't been able to manage that in the lobby, don't worry at all. There'll be plenty of time in the end around our questions and answers time, and I'll talk you through exactly how to download those when you need them. Okay, so let's get going and let's get to some introductions. Well, my own name is Jenny McMullen and I am a behaviour practitioner here with the National Council for Special Education. And I started 2 weeks before our lovely pandemic, February 24th, and I've been obviously working here since. But before that, I spent 2 decades working in schools for children with autism and complex needs. And as well as that, I supported, I suppose, the full gamut of educational settings, really, in what was formerly known as the Special Educational Support Service. So, you know, primary with a special class, post-primary, special class, post-primary, special schools, and so on. So it's very easy for me to say that my comfort zone is probably promoting positive behaviour, in particular with that student with complex need and with the dyad of impairment, so where autism is concerned. And then I suppose in terms of my own personal interests or my specific interests, I guess, it's also, I really am interested in finding out, can we and how much help it would be if we can identify the common challenges that seem to pervade special classes and special schools, and therefore if we can develop supports that build capacity but also that lessen the load. Now that's enough about me. I'm excited to say that we also have presenting here today Dr. Sinead Smith. And Dr. Smith is the head of the new School of Psychology in Dublin City University. She is associate professor, senior lecturer. She is psychology research convener and program chair of the Masters of Science in Psychology and Wellbeing. Her research interests are broadly speaking around behaviour change in the health and educational contexts. And her specific interests lie around sleep in clinical and non-clinical populations, around game-based classroom management and autism and anxiety. So just to say, we are so excited, and we hope that we definitely have actually benefited greatly from all this collaboration. And we're looking forward to bringing some of the specialisms together so we can try and, you know, really pinpoint need and provide supports to help you guys build your confidence in your theory and your skills and bring them back to get the job done in the classroom. Okay, so just before I hand you to Sinead, I have a tiny bit more housekeeping to do. And then we will get going. So the first thing to say is you can get my attention during this seminar. So all you need to do is, if you look above you there in your toolbar, there should be a little feature that looks like a hand. And if you go to the drop-down menu there, and I'd like you to practice now, you can, you know, raise your hand, you can applaud, give me a smiley face. If you're from Cork, you can say speed up. If you're from the rest of the country, you can say slow down. So just have a little practice there for me and let me know that everybody can find and use that feature. That's it, Leah. Thank you. Anybody else able to find it? Play around with it there. Okay, all right. That's it. Lena has her hand up, and anybody else, just practice away there. Don't be afraid. You're not going to do anything to my side of things if you're practicing. There, all the hands are going up here. Brilliant, excellent, fantastic. It's good to remember on our side to slow down and give you a chance to do this. Brilliant. And that's everybody raising their hand. So if you do need our attention, there'll be myself and one of the ladies here will be able to get to you. And of course, we have a chat box as well. So be sure to fire any questions you have or anything else you may have into your chat box. Okay, another feature I want to practice with you quickly. And I want to do it before we get going, because when this goes wrong in the middle of a seminar, it can interrupt the flow. So I just want to practice. You get to deface my screen here, and you won't cause any permanent damage. And I promise you it's lots of fun. So what you should see on the side of your screen here is a little toolbar. So it's here. And what I want you to do is I want you to go up to the pencil icon, select it, and I want you to scribble. Ah, ye have it. I want you to, hi, thank you, hello. I want you to scribble. You can scribble whatever you like. I don't know who's scribbling either, so you're free. Ah, that's brilliant. I actually love it. It doesn't grow old. Yeah, it's brilliant. It's great. You always want to do that to your teacher in school. It's fantastic. Okay, excellent, brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so similarly, we're going to fly through the next one. It's the same thing, guys, but what I want you to do is just practice typing. So it might be a tiny bit more fiddly actually, because you have to click into the screen after you have typed. So just type there, and listen, it doesn't matter. Hello, Jenny, hello. It doesn't really matter at all whether you type or draw. When I say type or draw, it's just interact with us. And for anybody who hates it, I'd be more than happy to for you to just type into the chat box. All is accepted here. Okay, brilliant. Ah, that's brilliant. Good. It's fantastic. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so now this is for your geography. And I meant to put a little star down to around the Cork area here. Yeah, you have it. If your geography is any good, you know the county bounds, just give us a little feel for where you are in the country. You get an A++ if you're from Munster, and you get an A+ from everywhere else. I'll stop the jokes around counties now, I promise. Hello, Nasa Daly. That's it. Oh, Westmeath, fantastic. Tipperary, all the way out in the ocean, fantastic. Yeah, some Midlands here. Where's Cork? Come on. There we go. Leitrim, brilliant, brilliant. Fantastic, that's great. Thanks, everybody. All right, oh, Tipperary, I'll give you a few minutes, you're flying. Up the Cats, they beat us too much in hurling. Go on, keep going, great. All right, brilliant, everybody. So look, we're largely around the Leinster area. That's it, and there up comes Cork. That's brilliant. Big circle. Love it. Okay, so from the fun to the, I suppose, a little bit more serious. So I'm going to introduce the NCSE to you. And as you guys probably already know, the role of the function, one of the primary functions of the NCSE is to provide advice and support to schools, to teachers, to parents, to guardians, and of course to disseminate research. But to give you a little bit more detail regarding the NCSE now, I have a video for you, and my fingers are crossed that video is going to play. So bear with me, and it's just 2 minutes long, but it's a little bit easier than listening. All right. If it doesn't play, we're not going to panic, and instead, I'm just going to explain. Okay then, guys, I'm going to leave the video for a second. So just to say, because it's going to keep sticking on us, I know. So just to say, look, some of the extra functions of the NCSE that you would be familiar with. The last image there was explaining to you that you will have received an email, and that will show you how to activate the use of the website so you can get in school support. We also have a large number of resources available to support teachers across the full gamut again of additional needs, and also resources for parents. So that's just a little bit about the NCSE. All right, okay, so another additional piece of work which is extremely important to all our work here in the NCSE, not least to mention actually the particular seminar that we're at today, and that is the framework around well-being. So what I mean by that is that the discussion, for example, that we're going to have today around helping students and supporting students to navigate the social environment, and indeed even the types of strategies that we suggest that you use to support the student to navigate, they are all done bearing in mind some important principles around well-being. One being that we want to enable students to realise their potential. So we want them to do as best as they can do, as of course you do. And also we want to increase their resilience so that they can deal with the normal stressors of life. We want to increase those skills where they can look after their physical well-being as much as is possible. And of course, finally, and definitely very importantly, we want to promote that student's sense of belonging, sense of connection, sense of purpose in the classroom, in the school, and indeed in their wider community and their wider life. So it's fair to say today that our seminar is going to touch on 3 of the 4 pillars of the Wellbeing Framework. The first being culture and environment, the second being curriculum, teaching and learning, and the third being relationships and partnerships. So that's woven through everything that we are going to be talking about today. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to turn off my camera and Sinead is going to pop on and introduce the next section of the seminar too.
Thank you, Jenny. And hopefully everybody can hear me. Am I audible? Give me a thumbs up if I am. Okay, that seems positive. Great. So thank you, Jenny, for the introduction. And I'm going to follow, I suppose, up from Jenny's introduction of me just to introduce the project that I'm working on and the reason why I'm here today. And I'm very glad to be collaborating with the NCSE on this. So as Jenny said, I work in the School of Psychology in DCU, which is a relatively new school. We're about 20 months old and I was a founding member of that school. And when the pandemic, I suppose, hit and when the impacts of that began to be felt, there was a lot of, I suppose, effort from all sectors to deal with this. The funding bodies in Ireland came together and came up with some very rapid responses to this. And one of those is the Health Research Board's rapid response to COVID-19 funding. And under that, I applied for, with some of my collaborators, and got some funding for what is the TRES project. So the TRES project it's short for Transition Resources, and we were aiming at autistic students, and the study is being conducted by me in DCU along with the NCSE, Middletown, As I Am, St Ultan's School in Ballyfermot. And really what we're doing since we started in June 2020 up until we end at the start of December 2021 is trying to focus on resources that will help with the changes that are constant at this stage as we navigate this new situation that we find ourselves in. So what we're trying to do in terms of developing those resources is to make them needs-based. So part of our research is around trying to identify what are the challenges being experienced now, what are the anticipated challenges, and also, I suppose, mapping to a degree the experiences that children and their parents are having at the moment at this very unusual time. So in terms of what we have done a series of surveys with parents and children looking to identify those challenges, looking to see where everybody's at, how they're getting on, and we're doing those longitudinally. So we're doing them 3 times, 6 months apart each, so that we can track and see if there are any changes in how people are feeling, how they're dealing with the situation. We have 2 of those surveys completed, with a third going out next month. And actually that's a little bit scary saying next month, because I hadn't realised until now how close we are to July. So that will be going out again, the final survey in July. What we've also done is talked to experts to try to get consensus on what the needs are of these children at this time. And by experts, I'm using that term, I suppose, loosely, but it's what we would term it in terms of our research when we're doing this type of study. So we're talking to teachers, we've talked to occupational therapists, speech and language therapists, psychologists. We've also talked to experts by experience. So adults with a diagnosis of autism, parents of autistic children, siblings of autistic children, in order to get a picture of and agreement on what the resource needs are and what priority we should work on them in, so that we're not targeting things that are already supported or aren't needed, making sure that this is very much needs-based. We're developing resources, and we will be assessing those resources, and you can see some of them on our website, autismtoolkit.ie. I think what I'm trying to get across really in this slide is that this is a collaborative approach, and this work that we're doing together with the NCSE and having this webinar and developing the resource pack to go alongside it is another branch of that collaborative effort. It's really making sure that what we're doing is needs driven, is focusing on what teachers, therapists, parents, children need at this moment as we deal with lots and lots of change, which can be difficult to get our heads around. So just to summarise, really, the aims of the TRES project are to map and record the experience of children with autism and their parents during COVID-19, to help deal with the multiple transitions that are being experienced at this time, and identify needs for resources and then develop those resources. In essence, what we're trying to do is localize it, get it all together. Some of it might be curating what's already out there as well as developing new resources. And really in doing that, we're just trying to lessen the load. So if you as a teacher need, a lesson plan on well-being around anxiety or something like that in the classroom, that we will be working on that and developing that so that there's somewhere for you to go. So that's an overview of TRES, but what I'm going to do now is give you a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about throughout the rest of the webinar. You know about TRES, you know about the NCSE, but what are we going to be talking about today? So we've divided today's webinar into 4 sections. We're going to be, I suppose, reflecting a little bit over what has happened over the last 15, 16 months. We're going to be then looking at our next steps, which is what is the social environment, exploring the social environment, moving on to the steps that we can take in order to access the social environment, and maybe practice some core skills while we're in the social environment. And then the final section, I will talk you through the resource pack that we have collaborated on in order to help us to make that journey through the social environment. So Jenny will focus on section 2 and section 3, so I'll be handing back over to her in a couple of minutes. So the aims of our webinar really are to review the importance of structure, routine, and an enriched social environment, enriched environment generally in supporting students, to consider the opportunity of the social environment in nurturing relationships, enhancing school experiences, and also developing and practicing core skills, to identify some strategies that can be used to support students when they're navigating that social environment, and also to identify and I suppose introduce some planning resources that can really help us as we make that, that journey together. So what we're going to do now is a little bit of, I suppose, reflection on what we have gone through over the past 16 months. And I'm going to begin this section by just a quick reminder to everybody that we've packed a lot into those 16 months. When the reality of the pandemic hit in March 2020, and a lockdown with school closures happened, it was very, very sudden, and it resulted obviously in those school closures, move to remote teaching and learning, and also for all of us, restricted access to our social environments. The world that we lived in, the world that we knew, was made an awful lot smaller. In September 2020, there were level 3 to level 5 restrictions at various different times, depending on where you were living. But schools were open, and Jenny will be talking through all of the hard work that school communities engaged in order to do that safely, and to allow everybody to reintegrate. But we still very much had restricted access to the social environment at that time. There were a lot of public health restrictions in place. In January 2021, as you well know, due to increasing numbers of cases, schools were closed again, we were locked down again, and our social environment was made a little bit smaller again than it had been in December. I think the key thing that we can see across this timeline is all the way through there has been restricted access to the social environment. There have been periods in which children have accessed school again, obviously from February, March onwards, as well as from September to December, but our social environment was a lot smaller. And as we go through May, June and into July, the plan is that it will continue to get a little bit bigger. So what, in, I suppose, real terms, has COVID-19 meant for many of us? I think the major thing for anybody is that there's been very much an increase in unpredictability, and things changing, being out of our control. And what we're seeing is that there's, in general, an increase in anxiety that has been experienced. And because of the nature of the public health restrictions, a lot of the coping mechanisms that we might normally rely on in order to help us deal with that, like, going on a 10-kilometre run, meeting up with a friend for a coffee, calling around to, parents or grandparents, for example, going to a swimming pool, going to the cinema. A lot of those things weren't actually available to us, those typical coping mechanisms that we had. And that lack of certainty can lead to a loss of confidence. It can lead to an increase in anxiety. All of these things are connected and they're interrelated in various different ways. When we then think about, at the moment we're talking about students with additional needs, we're talking very often today maybe about those with complex needs. What did COVID-19 mean for those children? Well, pretty much the same. All of this change, all of this unpredictability can very much be connected to increases in anxiety. Again, typical coping mechanisms are disrupted, and so it's almost like a little bit of a vicious cycle. What changes have resulted in those impacts for children? Well, the loss of structure and routine, and our research, which has been focused on children with autism specifically, rather than additional needs generally, but it has very much shown that routine was lost during the lockdowns because of everything that people were having to juggle and cope with, and it came back a little bit more strongly when the schools reopened and was lost again when the schools closed again in January. Obviously, as I mentioned, restricted access to social and leisure opportunities, but disruption to therapy, supports, respite services, things that have knock-on effects, but also are related, I suppose, to structure and routine. And then limitations on access to our social network, the wider family, to the community more generally. So there's been an awful lot going on, and those have had impacts. What I would say is that from the research that we've been doing, we can say that not all of those impacts were negative. While a majority of parents did report that their children were showing maybe declines in skills and abilities, for example, or increases in anxiety. For a substantial minority, we calculate at about 29% of our sample, the impacts were positive, skills were gained. So for some children, there was actually a break in the demands of pre-COVID life, a break in all of maybe the sensory input, the social demands, and the other maybe academic demands as well. But there were also increases, so increases in opportunity for parental contact. And what parents were reporting was, for some students, increased communication skills, increased daily living skills. So one thing that I think is important to bear in mind when we think about, how we've all experienced this pandemic differently, everybody individually will have had their own different experience, is that at various different times, different changes or different transitions will be challenging for some of us. They may not be challenging for others, but those others will have their own changes that are challenging. So for some children, getting back into school and getting back into that routine, or getting back into their social environment and into that routine, is something that may be easier than going into lockdown initially. But for some students who may have been enjoying that quieter, less pressure time at home, that transition back into their social environment might be more difficult. And we just need to be aware of that, and aware of the fact that everybody is experiencing this in different ways. So very briefly, I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened on the return to school, and Jenny will take over from there. But as you well know, initially when we went back in February and in March, student numbers were initially reduced and then they were increased. Many students happily returned to school, but we have a lot of parents reporting that children are more likely to refuse to go to school than they were pre-March 2020. So pre-March 2020, parents were reporting that about 9 to 10% of those who we were surveying, those children were refusing to go to school frequently or very frequently, whereas since the reopening in February-March time, that has more than doubled to 19.4%. So obviously some challenges there in navigating that. But students and staff worked together, adjusted to the new normal. So at this point, I'm going to hand you over to Jenny, who'll talk you through how we readjusted to that new normal.
Thank you, Sinead. Okay, so how did we do it? Well, look, our special classes, our special schools reopened. We did well. And what I'm going to say now, I haven't a shred of evidence for, but I think, in my own personal, humble opinion, that we did well, because a lot of what was expected of us is what we're already good at. We're good at using that physical environment to promote positive behaviour. We're good at establishing routine and micromanaging it. And we're good at enriching the environment, understanding that you have to vary and include your students' interests, and remembering to start at relationship, developing that positive and trusting relationship. So how do we do it? It's just what I said on the screen. We rearranged the classroom, we chose the right supports, we re-established routine, and we enriched the environment. And I'll talk briefly through each of those points now in a moment's time. Okay, so rearrange the classroom. We decluttered our classrooms. We made our play areas that bit more barren. We separated our students. In this particular image here, you can see perspex. And obviously, schools did really well. We put in systems to keep all the paraphernalia that come with their students separate. So we avoided sharing all of that stuff as much as we could. And we created pods, so relaxation areas, sick bays. I want to relax in there myself at the moment. So we had our relaxation or sick areas. We did well here in the next point as well for the next image. I think we did our best to continue to facilitate the activities that our students were previously familiar with. So what you can see here is a keyboard, and on the other side of that perspex, believe it or not, it's a drum kit. And I'm not joking. And it goes down a storm with students, not staff. But we did our best to keep presenting those to those students, but doing it in a safe manner. And of course, we created pods for our staff, and we supported them through this new phase that was going to happen in our schools as well. Now, that's not the only thing we did. We didn't just look at the physical structure, shall we say, or the physical environment. We also chose the right supports, and these were very familiar to our students. So I think this again was part of why we did well and why it might have been easy. So we transitioned, well, I won't say easy, rather why we did well. I'll leave it at that. So what we did is we understood that some of our students, pre-COVID, they may have been using visual schedules, but we thought to ourselves, you know what? They've been out, I've been on to mum and dad, perhaps I actually need to break down my visual schedule and just do a first, next, then. Present the day in a very simple fashion so the child knows what's expected of them and what's coming next. We also decided to think about the visual representation here. So would it be a picture? Would it be an object? Again, if you had a student using pictures in the past, would they now need an object? And we're flexible. We're able to pivot like that. We do well. And of course, after that, we reintroduced our visual schedules. So, we presented the sequence of the day, top to bottom, left to right, showing part of the day or all of the day, so that we made the environment predictable for our students. And of course, for many of the students with complex need that I'm talking about, we are talking about the dyad of impairment, so making it predictable was a really helpful thing to do for those students. Now, we remembered something else. We remembered motivation, very, very important for our students. So we decided to identify what it is our students liked, build those interests into the day, and or take out those structures that help the student understand when those preferred items were coming. So we call those token economies, or you'll hear people call them reward systems or star charts. But again, we got back out those structures with which our students were familiar, so they knew what was going to happen, even though the face of things were a little bit different. We established old routines, arriving to school, work and daily activities, transitioning, going home. You can see them all in front of you in the slide. And I'm sure there's many more activities and routines, I should say really, that you guys have established since you've gone back. We had something else to do this time. We had to teach new routines. Essentially, we had to teach the rules of COVID. So we had to try and, make sure that our kids, like the rest of us, were embracing and staying safe as much as is possible, and the same for our staff. But I think we did something well here as well. We learned to make that balance between establishing those rules and those routines and accommodating students who were not yet ready to follow the rule. So, I spoke to schools that were doing so well when they were saying, you know what, I do have to give some support around, for example, occupational therapy, where the distance wouldn't be as possible, but they call that essential business and more PPE, or whatever the logistics of it were. But we did very well at really understanding the student that was in front of us and yet coping in what was going on in front of us as well. Okay, now something else we did, aside from establishing the routines, is we enriched the environment. Now, to be fair here, I think the message that was coming out was loud and clear and really good. It was saying everywhere, when you get your students back to class, it's not about somehow backfilling or fast tracking the kids through the skills that they have missed. Instead, what it's about is understanding well-being, understanding that when your student comes back lightly anxious from what's been just going on, what's going to be very important is that you promote a sense of safety, a sense of calm, a sense of belonging, a sense of efficacy, so making sure they can be as independent as possible, and that sense of hope, so knowing that they can meet the expectation that it's set for them on a given day. So how do we do that? Well, we took the time to reacquaint with our students, and actually we should bear in mind the teachers out there who met their students for the first time, because students, they start their classrooms for the first time. So we really acquainted with our students, both in terms of listening to their voice and of course contacting mum, dad, guardians to get that really relevant information. We made the day fun and interesting, and I really think the message around well-being and the message around first happen, come back, and settle in and follow routine allowed us that space to do that. And then we slowly reintroduced work. Now, let's have a look at what we think we did well, and then we're going to go on to the second section of our seminar. So as I just mentioned, schools help students to return to school after a prolonged break. That was all about restructuring the classroom, establishing routine, and focusing on student well-being. Due to COVID restrictions, there were aspects of the social environment, however, that were still unavailable. And it's this aspect, it's this piece that we want to start providing support for going forward, because fingers crossed, these restrictions are going to start reducing and relaxing, and all that has been denied to us over the last 18 months, we can start to avail of again and remember how we used to do them and do so for the benefit of our students. Okay, so it's an easy sell. I just sold it. We've all sacrificed. We all know what it's felt like to not have that social environment available to us, and what that has meant. So let's just have a look at what exactly I mean by definition of the social environment. Well, really, I mean any environment that includes its physical surroundings as well as the social relationships that occur and its cultural milieu. So it's about looking at the groups that function and interact in those social environments, and then considering what opportunities it offers us in the context of the special class, and availing and capitalising on those as much as we can to support our students. Okay, so let's put that into simple terms. Jenny, what do you mean? What's that look like in the school? But sure, it means areas in the classroom, areas inside the school, areas outside of the school, all of which you can use to encourage that social relationship and again focus on all of the good things that the social environment gives to us. And I'm going to go through that in a little bit more detail in a moment's time. So what do they look like? And these are just really simple examples, and even a million more, I hope, popping into your head right now. So we have play areas, we've chillax areas, we've halls. I mean, I went into a school recently and the hall was the staff room. So hopefully that'll change and they can start using the hall for PE again. You know, we're talking about yards, we're talking about playgrounds, we're talking about sensory gardens. This will look obviously very different depending on the setting that you are in, but all schools have some availability with which they can use to support their student going forward. What does it look like in the community? Again, look, playgrounds, parks, coffee shops, libraries. Libraries are one of my favourite. I believe the local library here is opening up actually in the morning time again now. You can book in a time for your students to go, and it might be handy where suitable for students in a summer programme. You can book in for an hour to go and listen to stories. Stuff is all pretty exciting. But importantly, why are we going there? Like, what is our purpose of going there? Well, we are going there to nurture relationships and friendships. We are going there to reconnect, to get out of our bubbles or our four walls where we just saw the primary people in our lives. We are going there to enhance experience, and variety is the spice of life. We've definitely learned that, and it's important as well for that dyad of impairment, for that piece where you have students with autism and a rigidity of interest. Their life has become narrow, and we want to expand it again. We want to teach core skills, so we want to capitalise, and I'll go into these in detail now in a moment's time. We want to capitalise on those opportunities in the social environment to support those skills that you've chosen to teach for that very reason in your classroom. And we want our schools to, or we want our students and our schools to stay regulated. And actually, I was going to say, we want the classrooms to stay standing, and it's a piece, and I'll get to it in a moment's time. Okay, so what exactly do I mean by nurturing relationships and friendships? Well, look, the social environment, it's that bit less structured, isn't it? It's that bit less, I don't like using the word didactic, but quite maybe less formal. So it allows us to experience the students differently and them to experience us differently. And therefore it allows for some spontaneity, and we can use that spontaneity to interact with our student. And all of that is the stuff that helps us to develop positive and trusting relationships with our students. We can nurture friendships with peers. I think one of the greatest losses in the context of special classes, at least, in special schools, in COVID has to have been the stopping of all these reverse integration and integration programs. They are quite phenomenal for our students. And I have a little story here that I think is worth telling. I worked in a school for a number of years, and we're lucky enough to have contact with the local boys' school. And we had a student and he integrated it in that school. Now, it wasn't all success, and he struggled in some of the academic classes, but they opened their doors, and, they brought him on school tours and sports days. And essentially, he developed friendships with kids, and he stayed in the same classmate more or less the whole way up, even though the academic levels were different and he was kind of accessing different curriculum. He stayed with the same kids, so he developed friendship. Anyway, I tell you this for a reason. Fast forward and we call our student Jimmy. Jimmy pops off and he leaves us and he goes to a post-primary school with a special class. And lo and behold, his peers from the primary school come back in. I presume I can't remember now, but it was probably a transition program, whatever. And I met one of them and I said, oh, how is Jimmy? So he said, oh, miss, not too good. And of course, that wasn't the answer I wanted to hear. But suddenly his chest got bigger and he said, well, he said, it's all right though. I look after him, he said. He said sometimes he just says things when he kind of shouldn't, or essentially he tries to control things he shouldn't try to control in terms of conversation and what they were doing. But he said, I give him a dig out. I tell him to stop or I tell the others to give him a break. And I just thought to myself, that's gold. All the stuff that we do for our kids. When you're doing those kind of programs, that's the kind of stuff. Sometimes it's unquantifiable and you don't hear back, but that's the kind of stuff that people bring with them for life. So getting those reverse integration, those integrations programs back up again can be really supportive and helpful for our students. And of course, what else we can do in terms of nurturing relationship and friendship is when we bring the peers together, we can have them have them model, I should say, really, some skills, some important communication skills and social skills. And you know what? Let's say it. We educate each other about our differences, and that's what matters in terms of making us all a bit more of an inclusive society. So there's an awful lot to be gained around relationship, I think, and starting accessing the social environment again. Now, what else do we do? Well, we enhance experience. Variety is the spice of life. I said it earlier. We can vary place, activity, and experience. We can look at yard time, art time, games time, sports time. Sometimes I think to myself, especially if you look at young fellas, they could play with a ball anywhere, but playing a ball in the yard and then going to the field to play, they're two different things, and they keep the students entertained and going. So being able to venture out to these different aspects of the social environment, it's going to be important for you as you plan for your students in the summer program, if possible, and definitely, hopefully, COVID going well in the next academic year. Okay, so then I have to bring it back to teaching. Sure, we're all teachers at heart, so we have to think about teaching as well, don't we? So what else can I do in the social environment? Well, I can focus on core skills. What do I mean? The social environment allows us to focus on core communication, social, life, and leisure skills in a natural context. So what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say, in essence, a lot of what you teach in the classroom lends itself very naturally to the social environment. Why are you teaching skills? Actually, that doesn't really matter whether it's a student with additional needs or not. Everybody who got into the teaching game, their heart is about preparing the student for the next level. That's what you do it for. You do it to increase skills and to see that kid do better wherever they're going. And for our students with complex needs, right, and particularly for students with complex needs who are getting even older, a lot of the time when you're preparing them for that next stage, it includes practicing core skills I'm going to say real life, but your classrooms are real life, but in a natural context, right? So it involves supporting them in the social environment with which you'd normally use that skill. So they're not going to transfer the skill necessarily without some practice. So we're going to talk to you, and we have a little resource, and I am going to get to it, I promise, but we're going to give you a little scaffold in our resource that will help you think about that and maybe plan to practice those skills in the social environment when you get out there. So before I skedaddle from this slide, let me give you some examples, just in case I'm not being clear as well, of the different skill areas. So look, I'm sure you're onto this already, but communication skills. You have a student in your classroom. He's exchanging a picture of a drink to get a drink. But you might observe him sitting next to you in the Lewis, and he's not going to give you a picture of the drink in the Lewis because the cues are maybe different for this particular student. He hasn't quite understood or had the opportunity to practice exchanging picture in a slightly different context. And therefore he doesn't. But what a wonderful opportunity if you're teaching that in the classroom, then you can wait till he's thirsty in the park or going for a walk, and you can promote or prompt that kind of a skill. You might have a student who is maybe more verbal than that. So you may have a student post-primary, shall we say, let's pretend 13 years of age, he goes to the chipper on a Friday, and you may find that in the classroom, he's doing quite well and you're working quite nicely on him accessing information, receiving language, listening well in a group. But off you go on a Friday and his attention meanders. So perhaps you need to bring some of what you're teaching in the classroom into the social environment. You get my point here. And I'll go through how you would choose those as we go through a worked example in the next section. And then, of course, enjoying communicating with others. One of the most, I suppose, simple or basic explanations of communication would be that we get to express basic needs and wants. And so one of our most basic needs is connection with others. So it's about like helping students to enjoy that communication, and even students with that dyad where it may appear that they're not enjoying social connectedness. The reverse can be absolutely true. So again, the social environment allows you to work on that. Social skills, turn taking, sharing, waiting, queuing. By God, we learn about that. So we're not just lining up in the classroom, we're now lining up in Circle K. But I'm being a little bit facetious, but you're catching my point. Some of the kids who are in the classrooms learning of these things, that needs to transfer directly to an appropriate social environment, or any social environment, many of them if possible, and it needs to be practiced. Engaging with the group, expressing feelings, emotions. These are all things that happen in multiple contexts. Life skills. I always say you can't really teach a child to cross a road unless you're crossing a road. And that's even more true of students with complex needs. But with all of our students, we tell them, but sure, they don't do it. It's when we're with them saying, stop, look and listen, or whatever it is, and we're practicing that skill. That's when they learn. And so don't forget that. Transitioning, a very important skill, a very difficult skill for a lot of our students with complex needs. Multiple opportunities to practice that in the social environment. Money skills. If I'm sitting with a 6th class student and I'm teaching him money skills, whatever the strand unit that I should know is, well, then it's going to be important that I transfer that to the shopping centre so he can build it into a life skill. That's the field that I'm going for here. Leisure skills. This is an important one. Excuse me, my mind went there for a moment. Leisure skills. These, I suppose, Sinead said it earlier, didn't she? She said, look, this has kind of been an area where maybe we would say their students with complex needs have been hardest hit, right? We have, again, autism piece. We have that rigidity of interest. Their life is getting narrower. By definition and by need, their life got very narrow in COVID. But it's going to be time to gently reopen that world because we want to broaden their experience. So trying new and different things, self-entertaining, finding enjoyment in various activities. Really core things to be doing out there in the social environment. So you're not just, you're not just getting out there to empty the bucket, which I'll go through in a moment. You're getting out there to do some core skills as well. So what does she mean by empty the bucket? What's she on about? Okay, so there are a million analogies. That's a bit of an exaggeration. There are many analogies of this bucket, but I'm going to use one for simplicity and just to get a point across. And that's the Brabham and Turkington one, okay? So what Brabham and Turkington say is our stress levels can all be explained by a bucket, right? So we're walking around the place and our bucket of stress, normal, a third, just say a third full or 2/3 full. It's not about the math here, right? What happens? The day goes on, the tap goes on, and they're the stresses of life. So the analogy is water. It fills the bucket. What happens? The bucket fills over. Let's think about that as an analogy for our students in our special class. They come in 1/3, 2/3 full, bad, stressful journey to school, bad night before, in the middle of a toy trading program, whatever it is. They come in, Johnny next to them is being noisy, up fills the bucket. Then Jenny asks them to do something that's too difficult, up fills the bucket. You catch my drift. And this is normal life. You can't really control the bucket stresses are going to happen. You can't stop them all the time. But what you can do is you can do things to empty the bucket. Things like, reducing noise, giving movement breaks. I mean, there's a list of them. But in the context of the current seminar, the social environment, getting out there and having them enjoy the experiences, working on relationship, everything I've just discussed so far empties that bucket. And that's a really important thing to say. And the other thing is it also helps our classrooms. I'm not sure a classroom stays regulated, but it stays standing. We work hard. These classrooms can be very intense places, not all day, but they're busy and there's parts of the day, the week, the month, the year where they can be quite intense. So you do have to prioritize and manage your room so that you can manage that aspect of what's going to happen in your classroom. And the social environment allows you to do that while capitalizing on those core skills. So you're hitting two birds with one stone, is I suppose what I'm trying to say. Okay, so just to take a break from my tones, can I ask you, and this is just for fun, really, if you can't name an exact skill, it doesn't matter. But can I ask people to think of any student in their class, any kind of a core skill, communication, social, life or leisure, that they might practice in any social environment of their choice in the summer program or next year. So I'll give you a second to type it up because I do believe, oh, lovely. Safety skills, exactly. Right waiting, I love it. Anything else? Help, yeah, asking for help, I presume that means, exactly. It's true though, you know. Conversational skills, I love it. And there may even be skills you're not planning for actually in the classroom that you may support, I should say. But I won't confuse you any further. Can I leave, please? Exactly. That's a good point. I like whoever wrote that. I like you all, but I like that. You may also have a student who does not want to be in a social environment, and it's a really key skill that they can say, stop this event, and that you listen and honour that should it be appropriate. So that's really good. I think Niamh Murphy's writing time down there. I like that. Very good. Toilet. Yeah, I love that, Angela. Like, again, using the toilet in public spaces, whatever. I mean, I'm assuming here appropriateness and I'm assuming risk assessment. I'm assuming all of those pieces. But yes, that's really, really important. Core skills, and you're right, that is a life skill, Angela. You're not wrong there. Really, we are going broad here. And what we're saying, I'll say it again and then I move on to the next section, is when you have a student with complex need, in particular when that need is learning, and in particular when that student is getting older, all of those skills that make them more independent in the world outside your classroom are relevant and can be put down on the IEP. I'll go another concept there, or can be capitalised in the social environment. I'll leave your IEPs alone for a moment. You catch my drift. Well done, everybody, and thank you so much for paying so much attention. Okay, so here I go. Put my money where your mouth is. Section 3. Taking the first step to the social environment. So it's all very well now saying why we should go. And it's all very well saying what we should do there, but that's why you're all here. How are we going to get there? Well, the first thing we're going to do to get there is we're going to decide where to go, right? Shop, park, playground, cafe, library, yard. There's millions, and they'll be available to you depending on your setting. That's not really the burning question, though. Here's the issue. And I'd love to give a stock answer, and the truth is I can't, right? The issue is we have special classes that vary setting by setting. And you know more than I know how diverse the needs of your students are in these special classes. Then think about special schools. Exact same thing. Very diverse need. They differ. Age, circumstance, the works. Then we have post-primary. They even have people, so they wouldn't have teachers and 25 million subject teachers to deal with. Another layer on top. So that makes where you go difficult. The other thing to say here in the context of this seminar is you may have teachers here in this audience who are preparing to take a class for the first time. They may not know the 6 children. That's going to determine where you go. Or you may have a teacher who's extremely experienced, who has a student who's suddenly come back after the summer, who doesn't want to go anywhere. So it's not something that I can give you a stock answer for. So instead, what I'm going to do is bring you through some of the thought process and then give you some, I suppose, very general guidelines of what I would personally do around the area of helping the students actually transition to the social environment. So the first thing I'm going to do when I decide where am I going to go is I'm going to think about skill level and skill priorities, right? So I'm going to think, okay, I have a student, what is the basic skill level that they are at, and what social environment might I find the most opportunity to practice that skill? Obviously, that's a reason, one of the core reasons that I want to go there. I'm also going to look at if they enjoyed it in the past, if they're likely to enjoy it still now, all of those kind of questions. And we have a little, as I say, we have in our resource pack, we have a document that will scaffold you here a little bit and help you to ask these questions. But the thing is, I am going to have to think about the potential challenges or risk as well, and I'm going to have to balance that decision. So a simple thing like staff to student ratios, if you have an SNA who calls in sick on a Monday morning and you decided that you're off and you're ready to go on a walk, you may not be able to, and instead you may have to cancel that and go to the school hall. They're the kind of logistics that get in the way of answering this question. So what I can say to you as a guideline is, what I will always do is I will try to choose an environment that suits you and your student best. So you have to consider the overall needs of the classroom. I'm going to think about it occurring at the best time of the day, and just think about the bucket there. So I'm going to think about, let's do this when his bucket is less likely to overflow. And I'm going to think about the groupings of our peers. We all know there are different relationships in our classrooms. Some children have a more relaxed relationship with each other. Other children are triggers. And in a situation where you have a student who's hesitant to struggling, taking the steps to go to a social environment, then I'm going to support success by choosing the best time of day with more or less the best groupings. So that's probably the easiest way for me to answer that piece of the question. Now, the next piece is when I've decided where to go, how am I actually going to maneuver or make my way? So I have 3 things that I'm going to tell you to do. And you're going to do those 3 things regardless really of your setting. So the content's going to change, but you are all going to do the following 3 things in terms of helping your student to get there. 1 is you're going to create a roadmap. 2 is you're going to break down the steps, and 3 is you're going to enjoy the destination. And you're going to remember that everyone does get there, albeit at their own pace. Okay, now, so what do I mean by create a roadmap? Well, you're going to ask the right questions, you're going to gather the right supports. In 2 ways. You're going to know how and when to prepare your student, and you're going to gather and bring the supports you need for them to take the steps as well. And we'll go through that in a moment or 2 time. And you're going to write down the plan. Something you're good at anyway as teachers, but there's just something about when you write down the plan, you're more likely to adhere to your plan really, and respond well in the social environment that you're going to. So look, what questions? These are 6 questions. They're embedded in our resource. You might have 6 different questions. It really doesn't matter. These are really broad things that I would think about. For example, if I was bringing a student to the social environment, what activities does he enjoy? That might help me choose where I'm going. Where did your student enjoy pre-COVID? Has that changed? Or where is he likely to enjoy, or she, now? What challenges might you expect? You have to get real. You know, if you have a student who's afraid of dogs, then you mightn't walk past the park. I don't know. And what can you do to prepare for those challenges? And then vitally, what sports do you need to bring with you? I'm going to get on a bit of a soapbox later about that, but that's a vital piece. Bring the supports with you. Okay, so you've asked the right questions. Tell me more, Jenny, about these supports. So I mentioned that what we did when we talked about this is, for explanation purposes, we separated out supports into 2 categories. The kinds of supports you would use to prepare your child in advance, and then the kinds of supports you would use to actually have to make the steps. But there is an overlap here. Also, I'm going to say at the outset, you're going to hear me a lot of the time saying some students. I very rarely say all students, because absolutely, for sure, more of you will think of a student for which this particular support would be a problem. That's, again, in relation to the diversity of our students. So I'm talking about some students, okay? So the first thing you can do for some students is you can sit down and tell them in advance, do you know what, we haven't been out and about for a while, but today we're going to go on a walk, okay? And you're going to do that maybe with sign or just with words. The other thing that you can do is you can do that with picture. And I spoke to a colleague of mine, and she's a primary advisor around behaviour, actually. So some of you may have met her, Mary Lyons. And she said to me, do you know what I like to do? She said, what I usually tell them, I take pictures of where we're going, who, when, how, what, why. I have the little questions down there. I take the relevant pictures. Usually said I'd take photos, and I stick them into a little album without text, depending on the student. And she said, I tell the story of what's about to happen using that album. And the reason she likes that is, she said, they quite like to flick through the album, and they can bring it with them as well. So that's just, I suppose you'd call it a photo story. But really, it's a matter of putting the story in picture into an album. The other thing you can do is you can get out your visual schedule. You can use a symbol this child can access, like, for example, a picture of walk here, and put it on their visual schedule as you explain to them what's about to happen, if that is appropriate for your students. And finally, you can create a visual story. That's a bit similar to Mary's example of a photo story, but this time we're going to include some text. And you'll use that to, at a good time in the day to explain to your child what's going to happen. And this particular visual story is included in your resource pack for you to take away, but it's an example. So you guys go, take it, change it, and use it for a circumstance that suits you. Okay, so the second category of supports is you're going to include supports or gather supports that you will use to make the transition. So for example, a first then board, and I have a worked example coming up of the steps you're going to take, and I'll talk a little bit more detail there. But this represents your plan. So you'll be saying to your student, for example, first walk, then choice time, whatever it is. And then you are going to think about whether you need a countdown. So for example, some students will need to be cued by you just saying, let's go. Other students might need you to count down. Other students might need you to count down with a visual. Other students, you might use a timer. And actually, I should say my own personal preference, where possible, is that whatever event happens before you make your steps into the social environment, put it into routine and have it have a natural finish, if that's possible. So for example, puzzle time, and when all my puzzles are finished because the pieces are in the box, then I go. If you can do that kind of idea that works for your student, that is absolutely lovely and very natural. Otherwise, you're going to have to do a kind of count time scenario like I have suggested. And then you're going to gather distractors. Now we have an issue with the terminology here. Distractors reinforces would be one I would be used to. So that would be the item that you give them when they've done what you want them to do. Or also you'll hear people talking about transition objects. Now they have a particular function, as you know. So usually that's a kind of kinesthetic 3D object that lets the student know where they're about to go. And sometimes, quite frankly, the item kind of has multiple functions for one student. But if you need a transition object or a distractor, or if you have an extra reward, you have to gather them and bring them with you as you go to the social environment. Now, you also have to decide on a system for bringing them with you. Here's the thing here, and I don't know if it's a cultural thing and we get shy or what, but what we find, or what you'll probably notice yourself really, is schools are very good at using supports in the classroom. They're just good at it. They do it every day. They put you to shame. Yeah, we forget the odd time, but we're human. They're very good at it. And they're kind of good when they go to the hall or an area near enough to the classroom. But the further they go from the school, the not as good they are. So I don't know whether it's we don't, we're awkward with materials out and about, or we forget. I don't know. But it is important. It stands to reason that if your student uses supports.
Sorry. No, I'm back now. Sorry. Sorry, it froze for a second.
Oh, thanks, Aoife. Will I keep going? Will you raise your hand there if, I'm not sure if that was interference on my mic or ye can hear it. Will you raise your hand if you can hear me? Brilliant. Brilliant. Ah, excellent. Thanks very much. Brilliant. Wonderful. That's it. Fantastic. So it stands to reason that if your child needs supports in the classroom, they're going to need some supports in the social environment. So do identify whether you're going to bring it in a bum bag, or whether they're going to put it in a plastic, envelope with the first 10 pictures behind, or a lanyard, or, it doesn't matter. Actually, to say, before I finish this slide, obviously the optimum is that the student carries those support. Should, again, some students, never all students, some students may be ready to do that. If that's the case, you want them to self-manage, wonderful, and do encourage that. Okay, so the last piece, I said it earlier, I actually almost feel bad saying this to teachers because you are so good at this, right? So you got to write the plan down. I have a little resource here. Sinead will explain it to you in terms of the resource pack. It's very simple. If you prefer your own one, use it. But do write the plan down. Also, and I'm sure you've learned this yourself, if you are bringing SNAs with you and you're hoping, for example, that they'll get really involved with doing what you plan to happen in the social environment, collaboratively working with SNAs when you're at the planning phase can really help that. And also, and actually one of the therapists here mentioned this to me last week, these documents can be wonderful for giving them to parents and for planning the next opportunity. They're almost a way for us to communicate our plans and help us decide how we're going to build on success along the way. So they really do help us, and I hope that I know that you will continue to do that. Okay, so we have got as far as creating our roadmap. We've done very well. So what's the next thing that we are going to do? Well, we are going to break down steps. So I'm getting to the meat of it now. All right. So I have decided, actually, first I should say to you, the example that we chose today is going for a walk, because we really decided to try and come up with an example that would best suit every circumstance. So regardless kind of age and skill level and circumstance, going for a walk is either going to be part of going to the social environment, or it's going to be the actual event that you do. Maybe over the summer program, that's as far as you're going to get. So that's why we chose that example. So let's have a look. The first thing you're going to have to do when you decide where you're going to go is you have to break it down into manageable steps. The 3 steps that we chose here: walk to the classroom door, walk to the door, open it and step outside, walk to the door, open it, step outside, and go to the yard. There may be a number of other steps. The more complex, the more difficulty the student is having, the more steps there's likely to be. And of course, the very physical environment you're in is going to change those steps. But ultimately, you are breaking them down. And then what are you going to do next? Well, you're going to use your plan. So you're going to say to the student, first, for instance, we are going to walk to the door. Then we have choice time, or whatever that piece, that's going to be an individual piece for a student. You are then going to cue the student. So think back to what I said in terms of giving that child the countdown, either because an event that's routinely done has finished, or because you're counting down using a visual, using a timer, whatever that will be. You then guide your students' best efforts and you reward. Now, a quick note on reward. Yes, when we think of rewards, sometimes we think of edibles, we think of an item, and that's great. And you may have a student who needs that. But what all students definitely need, and I said the word all this time, is they need reward as well, to be that piece where you give them a high five, a thumbs up, an affirmation, an acknowledgement, and encouragement. So we're praising their best efforts. And if, as well as that, a child needs you to have an item that they get as well as that praise, or that you keep specifically for the journey, then go ahead and do that. But I have a little bit of good news here. A lot of the time, for some students, what you will find is the reinforcement is kind of embedded in the actual activity. So often getting to the end of the step or going on to the next step can be sufficient reward. And if that's the case, wonderful, so be it. And what you do is you move on to the next stage of the plan. You plan, you prepare, you support the next effort. And hopefully that will be further than it was the last time. You use your supports, you prepare your child, you take the next step, and you reward all effort. And you build on that again. First then, cue your student, bring the child further again if possible, and reward. Now, if you guys are thinking to yourselves, she's not going to tell me that this is like the answer to all problems I've had in terms of getting to a social environment, I'm absolutely not going to say that, because it's not going to be a success or only journey. And you definitely are going to have students who range from hesitant to struggling. But what I am trying to do is give you a little frame that you can use to help yourself. And here is why. Here is our tendency. What happens is we either don't venture out where we would like to go. And that can be absolutely fine and appropriate. And it might be because there's too much risk. That's fine. But sometimes it's because we've gone there. And for instance, maybe that step on that day was just a little bit too hard for the child, and the child has maybe a meltdown, or, everything gets upset. It really hasn't been, should we say, a comfortable or a positive experience. And then what we tend to do is we go back, and I think our confidence is knocked and we don't go out again. That's a bit dramatic, but you catch my drift. And what I'm trying to say to you is there's a little bit of a middle ground here. And this is the breaking the down steps piece. And I've given you a little frame so that if that happens to you the next time, you can think, well, is there an aspect of that could be to do with my planning? Maybe the first then isn't right, or whatever that piece could be. Maybe it's the cueing, or maybe, and this is where it's very likely to be the case, it's the traction between the next two pieces. Maybe today, the effort that I have that I'm expecting of him is just a little bit too large for the amount of reward that he or she is getting. And that's practice. And by the way, if you're feeling bad, please don't, because any of us who work in behavior, it's that stuff that we are trialing and erroring all of the time 20 years later. So sometimes it's about getting that traction. So it's really breaking down the steps even further and maybe accessing, giving that student a little bit more reward. So it's just a little bit of a framework to help you in terms of practical strategy. And again, Sinead's going to kill me. I'm going to stop talking about the resource because that's her job next. That's all embedded. So even a little information document to repeat what I'm saying here is embedded in our resource to really help you, because I'm sure late on a Tuesday now, you've had enough of me. Okay, so how are we going to do it? So I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to go a little bit quicker here. Well, we're going to enjoy the destination. Do you know what we're going to do? We're going to remember that slide I did earlier. We're going to focus on, when we get there, we're going to focus on relationship and friendship. We're going to enhance activity, and we're going to support core skill. Now, to talk you through that, I have a worked example, the final planning resource in our resource pack. Right, so let's have a look at this. What do I mean? This, again, very, very simple document that looks at almost the generalization of skill, but very simply done. You'll have others, that's fine. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to know who my student is, what their favorite items are. That's a big thing. I'm always going to have them with me in case I need them, who they like spending time with, and how they typically like communicating. I'm going to encourage all forms of communication. But I do want to be very clear on how they typically like communicating. And then I'm going to consider I'm going to consider a skill across the 4 skill areas that I might be teaching at the moment, and that might have an opportunity there, and for which there might be an opportunity to capitalize on the social environment when I get there. So let's have a look at Jamie, asking for food or drink or a favorite toy by a sign or a picture. Or a social skill might be sharing the gym ball. That's happening in class, so maybe it'll be sharing a swing, and we'll see what I said actually in the social environment. But look, social skills, sharing the gym ball, staying with others during play times, and less structured times. Then a life skill, getting ready to go for a walk. That's simple. And a leisure skill, going on the walk. We are talking that simple, okay? And when I have that bit done, what am I going to do? Well, then I'm going to identify as much as I reasonably can an opportunity that might come up for me in the social environment and make a plan to capitalize on it. Communication still. So here I'm going to use a gesture to ask for a drink or favorite item when on a walk. Social skills, walking alongside others. Life skills, staying on the path during a walk. And leisure skills, going for a walk with friends. So here I'm going to say, in terms of actually providing a support for this skill, I might decide to model for the child how to ask for the drink. And you'll know this, like, it's very difficult when you're not in front of a student. I can't tell you what to do because this is all based on assessment, but you guys know your kids, so you know this. You're like, okay, I know what level of support he needs in the classroom. I'll just see how I can do that if I can in the social environment. You can see here Mary will walk alongside Jamie and remind him to stay on the path at all times. You may not think that's a skill, it absolutely is. And then Mary will appraise Jamie's effort to walk on the path with others and make sure that he has his fidget toy or torch if he wants it. So that would just be really that simple of a level of plan to get core skill from the classroom into the social environments. And then finally, just a little piece, I kind of said it earlier and really probably in the wrong place. So I'm going to try it again, because this is more likely a document that you're going to maybe share. So, you might share it with yourself the next time around when you're going to the next social environment, because you're going to need it to decide what to do the next time. Or an aspect of it could be shared with mum and dad to encourage them, for example, to work on one skill. And you'd always, you guys don't know this, you'd work on, you break it, you'll set the parents up for success even more so. So you just be saying to mum and dad, look, we're really working on, for example, keeping Jimmy on the path. And that could be something that when you go for a walk in the evening, really try and shadow him and keep him as a matter of routine on the path as he goes. So this piece here is, do I need more practice, and can I build on some or all of the skills? Okay, now, top tips. Plan and prepare. Easy sell. Choose an environment that works for you and your child. Trial and error. Remember which peers work with which peers. You'll probably have a good sense of that. It is important. Pick a suitable time of day. Again, you have a good sense of that. It is important. Keep supports in place even when the going is good. My last soapbox. We don't tend to be I can't believe I got to hear and not mention it actually. We're not amazing at this. Sometimes what happens is we're brilliant when chips are down and we get in there and we do everything. And then the kid gets better and then we relax a little bit and then it goes backwards again and then we get the sports back out again. And actually it's almost worse because the kid knows what's happening. So, just think about that. If you have a child who's likely that you're going to have things are going to go up and down as you're doing it, then keep the supports in place even when the going is good. Choose an alternative day. Sometimes it just can't be done, but always try again. Reward your students' best efforts. Consider a different reward. You may well need to scaffold the child a little bit further and pick a reward specifically for the journey. And use the planning tools to help you make the journey. It's not just the kids' buckets that fill up, it's yours too. There is a lot of work in supporting these students. So you use every planning tool and every support you can to get the job done. Okay, so everybody, thank you so much for listening. And I'm going to very quickly pass you on to Sinead. Thanks, Sinead.
Thanks, Jenny. So I am going to very quickly do a whirlwind tour through the last few slides before everybody can take a big sigh of relief and enjoy your evening. So really, I'm just going to present a few, I suppose, final thoughts, but also just a quick talk through the resources that are available to you to take away from today, as well as the recording, obviously, of this webinar. So just in terms of the resources that I'm going to be talking through, I'm going to be talking through the ones that we have worked together on through our TRES and NCSE collaboration. Obviously, the NCSE has a wealth of other resources that are available to you as well, and I would absolutely encourage you to go and look at those. But I also, want to get a little bit of a plug in here for TRES and for our project, because we have also developed a number of resources which are there to hopefully make life a little bit easier, and they are aimed not only at teachers but also at SLTs, OTs, parents, and the children themselves as well. And they take a variety of different forms, from lesson plans like you can see there to videos, PowerPoint presentations to visual stories. There's a variety of different things that are up there. And I think that the nice thing about this webinar and this coming together is that really we're focusing on those children maybe with more complex needs, and identifying some strategies that are really helpful at this point. And I think when you go through the webinar from today, when we started off by looking at the story so far, really it was to say, look how far we've all come and how far you've taken your students through this journey. But now, next step is our social environment is opening up again, it's widening again, so those opportunities are available again. So what we've done is we've worked together to design and deliver obviously this seminar, but also this resource pack that will go along with it. It's straightforward and simple to use. A lot of it Jenny has so comprehensively talked you through already. It's something that allows us to transition at this sort of, I suppose, limbo stage we're at, which is still during COVID, but hopefully with a view to getting post-COVID, very soon with any luck. It's something that really, I think, is useful in focusing effort and focusing attention on the social environment and the opportunities for social skills or for accessing the social environment. And it's very practical and it's also student-led. So in terms of what the resource pack contains, so there is an information document which is a summary really of a lot of what we have talked about here in terms of section 3 that Jenny ran through and section 4 that I'm talking about now of the webinar. So it's giving you some background, some information and some tips. Also have a social environment checklist, which I'll talk through now in a moment, creating a roadmap template, a visual story and a planning document for how we can support core skills template. which is what Jenny gave you that walkthrough, a worked example of. So this is this is the main body of it. You can see that there's a lot of information in there, a lot of which is they're just as a support for you, to remind you, I suppose, of the various different topics that we've talked through today. In terms of the specific resources, the checklist, I think, is something that's really a useful planning tool, something to get us thinking and keeping us on, I suppose, this straight and narrow. Do I have everything? Or is this relevant during this, particular outing, or for this particular skill that we're practicing? So it's really about what Jenny was talking to you about, asking the right questions. So, if you know where you're going to go, have you asked those questions? As a result of that, you should know what the supports that you need are. You will have materials to prep your student and tell them what's happening, and you know what supports you need then for your journey. So dividing it up into that, getting ready. While we're on the journey, what might we need? Can we get those resources in portable format to bring with us? And then at the destination, what are we going to practice in the social environment, if that's relevant? May not be relevant for your student at a given time, or that might be directly where your student is ready to go to, is practicing skills in the social environment. The key thing here is that this is student-led, so you can identify that, and you will have identified that through this other document, which is our roadmap, our template, where you're really drilling down and reminding yourself what you know about your student, if that's a student that you're already very familiar with, or familiarising yourself with your students' preferences, like their friends, their favourite items, their favourite activities, things that they used to like doing, places they used to like going pre-COVID, but also during COVID, what maybe replaced that. And I think some really nice things in this roadmap are having that space to reflect on what your student may not like about trips, and then the flip side of that, what you can do to help your students to navigate that. And I think from your interaction with Jenny's question, there are things that you're already probably doing in the school situation that, can you transfer that? So for example, giving your student the means to communicate that I'm done here, time to leave. And I think the key thing about this is, Jenny has talked about the students' buckets overflowing, and really with a lot of these planning tools, obviously we're thinking about the students' well-being and, they're allowing them to reach their potential. But also I think we have to think about, as educators, and I may be educating adults, but I'm an educator nonetheless, I suppose, is that we have to think about our own well-being as well, and these planning tools really can help us to think things through in advance, to reflect and to tweak things for next time, and to stop our own buckets from overflowing, which is a really important thing to remember. Also within the resource pack, we have a visual story. And again, this is a visual story that follows on from a section in the resource pack on breaking down the activity. So the activity here, the example that we have is getting ready to go for a walk. That's the example that we chose, but you can use this structure to focus on another skill, if that's what's relevant, or another outing. Whatever you have decided based on your assessment is the right thing for your students and for your classroom. And then finally, we have that lovely resource that Jenny talked about in terms of planning for how we can support practicing core skills in the community, having that opportunity to practice them, maybe not necessarily in the community, but away from the desk, away from the classroom, somewhere different, having that opportunity. And for some students, they're at that stage now and they're ready, and you might be only dying to get using that tool during the summer program, or even in September when your students are coming back and, you know, getting used to their routine in school again. But for others, it might be building up to that point. But it's always having that in the back of your mind, that accessing the social environment provides social opportunities where we can practice, you know, useful skills like those that you already yourselves have identified. And speaking of, I suppose, practicing, Jenny has already highlighted how, you know, some of these skills might be practiced with parents as well. You know, away from the classroom also includes the home setting. And the NCCSE has some really helpful resources for parents that you might want to direct your students' parents towards, if that is something that is appropriate depending on your student and their home situation. So just to highlight those. So I'm conscious that that's a very quick whistle-stop tour, but we have reached the end of section 4 now. We are going to